Nobody's coming to save you. It's a simple phrase, but one that can mean the difference between success and failure. Elite performers know when it's time to take action. They need to be ready to execute with precision and without excuse. Scott Mann is a retired Special Forces officer, the architect of Operation Pineapple Express, and a leader who knows how to get results against the odds. Scott first joined me after the withdrawal from Afghanistan to share how he took a stand when few would. Now, he's shown us just how to apply an action-first mindset to anything we set out to do. Our rainy Sunday morning conversation from the banks of New York City's East River was the perfect backdrop to break down his new book, Nobody's Coming to Save You, a Green Beret's Guide to Getting Big Shit Done. Scott breaks down the churn, the divisive, fear-laden complex world that's in our face 24/7 across all of our devices. He shows us how that's put us all in a trance of distraction, disengagement, disconnection, and distrust, where transactional relationships focus on performing for each other rather than creating connection. As a leader of action, Scott gives us the cure, which, rightfully so, will be messy. Jump in with Scott and I as we wake up New York City. Then head over to our YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform to catch all of our coverage of the 2024 election cycle and our national security series with today's most prominent Special Forces leaders. Scott, welcome back to the Jedburgh podcast.
Thanks for having me back, Fran. Cool to be back, man.
Well, last time you were with us, we were on the other side looking at the World Trade Center from down in lower Manhattan, 44th floor. Beautiful view that we had that day.
Yeah.
A little bit nicer blue sky day. I was hoping for the same thing here in Long Island City, but I wanted to spend some time with you right here.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Looking at the city behind us because it's like 8 in the morning.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about Nobody's Coming to Save You, a Green Beret's Guide to Getting Big Shit Done.
Yeah.
Because nothing gets shit done like this city, and nothing gets shit done like Green Berets. So we put two of them here on the pier early in the morning on a Sunday.
Perfect,
we
man.
can get some shit done.
No place I'd rather be.
Let's talk about the book for a minute, because it's been a bit since you and I had a
Yeah.
chance to catch up. Like I was saying, last time we talked about Afghanistan.
We did.
We talked about Operation Pineapple Express. We talked about your efforts to get so many people, instrumental efforts to get so many people out of Afghanistan. A couple of years later, we still reel from so much of the effect of what happened there in so many ways, as we've had conversations on this podcast, whether it's been with senior military leaders, whether it's been with politicians. We attribute so much of the chaos almost to those moments of getting out of Afghanistan and what that meant. Are we in chaos? Where are we? But at the end of the day, regardless of the situation around us, we have to make things happen.
We do. That's right.
Why write this book? Why now?
I think you just framed it. I mean, honestly, I think that was for me, that was the biggest reason. Was you and I both learned as young Green Berets from really awesome NCOs that when you're out in those rough, trust-depleted places, I call it the churn, nobody's coming. Whatever you're out there with is what you've got. And the bulk of what you're going to do, in addition to your lethal skills, is how the relationships you build and the connections you make. And that's going to get you through it. And you're going to do it from the bottom up, right? And that, to me, as I look at the country today and where we've evolved to, we are in our own form of that unprecedented churn. Distraction and division and disengagement today are higher than it's ever been. And I think it's an unprecedented, novel set of social conditions, Fran, that are in front of us right now. Leaders, business leaders, community leaders, politicians, we're so divided. And if we don't, what got us here is not going to get us there. We need a set of skills that looks a lot like Green Beret skills to get big shit done. And so that's why I wrote this book, was to try to help leaders who are stuck in these novel circumstances that we've been talking about right here at home to still move things forward, because I think our institutional leaders are really struggling.
You brought up a couple of the Ds. You call them the 4 Ds.
Yeah.
Distraction, disengagement, disconnection, and distrust.
Right.
And you attribute that to the churn. That's what you're using to describe this churn. This never-ending nonsense in a lot of ways that goes around us. Break these 4 down for a second.
Yeah, so let's start, contextually with places that you and I worked with when the global war on terror was still going. So, for example, if we moved into a small village in Afghanistan, in rural Afghanistan, and we needed to work with that village, right? And you go in there, let's say that village has been through years and years of violence and war. That elder sitting across from you that's tickling the trigger of his AK-47, deciding whether or not to dispatch you in that first meeting, is not necessarily the enemy, although he feels like the enemy. He looks like he could be the enemy. The reality is the enemy is more about the social circumstances that exist in that village. You've got to find a way to navigate through that and connect with that guy. Yeah. I think that's the same thing here. Those 4 Ds, I believe that's far more the enemy than the Democrat or the Republican, the mask or the no mask. It is this set of conditions, starting with distractions. The average attention span of a human in the West is 8 seconds.
And that's down. So, like, I think about this show over the last couple of years.
Right.
When we first started this show, we talked about how we're going to promote it.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, okay, you have to have a minute. You have a minute of engagement. This was 3.5 years ago.
Yeah.
So our promos could be 60 seconds long.
Yeah.
Then we realized after a year, wow, we're losing people at 45 seconds.
Yes.
Okay, cut them down 35, 40 seconds.
Right.
We're down now, 3 years later, 15 to 25 seconds. After that, they're gone.
Well, I mean, that proves my point. And a lot of it has to do with these dopamine dispensers that we carry around with us, I mean.
Where they're viewing us.
Absolutely. And it's a dichotomy, isn't it? Right. But it has conditioned us to be much less attentive. We're distracted far more. Adam Ghazali, in the book The Distracted Mind, he says that we are ancient brains trying miserably to make sense of a high-tech world. Our biology just hasn't changed. So that's the distraction piece. Then you've got the disengagement piece, right, which is the absence of purpose. Disengagement scores on average in corporate America today are somewhere around 85%. 85% of the workforce and the management says they're disengaged. That means they lack purpose. And that's a huge leadership problem. If you don't know what your purpose is or you don't know what your why is, we're meaning-seeking creatures. And so that's a real thing. And then the final two, the disconnection, we're really disconnected from each other, but we're also disconnected from the natural world. We've lost the disconnection to our human nature, who we really are at a primal level, and then the distrust. 2/3 of Americans no longer trust their neighbor. And when you add all those D's together, that is a novel set of circumstances that make it very difficult to get your stuff done.
Well, there's a few points in here that I think about when I read the book and when you talk about these 4 Ds. And what comes to my mind, and you bring it up in the book, is transactional relationships.
Yeah. Yeah.
When everything is done through our phone, now post-COVID, we live in this world where it's Zoom. Okay, well, get on a Zoom. We're in a world now where people don't pick up the phone and call you and actually have a voice conversation anymore.
Yeah.
I was in the car with my daughter the other night, taking her to a football game. We're supposed to pick up her friend. We're driving to her friend's house, about half a mile from the girl's house, and she's running the other way down the street.
Huh.
And I said, hey, Lily, call your friend. We're on the way to pick her up, but she seems to be going the other direction. I can't. I'll text her.
Wow.
You'll text her? That's ridiculous. How about I open the window and I yell, hey, we're right here, which is what I did.
Yeah.
And then my daughter's yelling at me that, why would you open the window and talk to her? Well, I don't know. We're going to pick her up. She's not at her house. But that's how crazy it's become when we talk about this transactional relationship where people don't sit in front of each other and talk.
Yeah. I was just in a coffee shop right over here. While we were getting set up, and it said, no Wi-Fi available, pretend like it's 1995. And I thought, that's so cool. But so to your point, that's a reflection of our disconnection from our nature. It's from the natural world. Like, that's not how humans are actually wired to communicate. We're wired to communicate like what we're doing right now, face to face. And this beautiful city that you see behind us, metaphorically, when I talk about this in the book, the tip of the iceberg of our human nature, or what I call the human operating system. It's the modern world. It's where we live, work, and play. It's everything. And you look behind me at that skyline and you think that's what the world is really about. That's everything that exists around us. But what we don't see is what's below the waterline of that iceberg, which is our primal biological nature. The hunters, the gatherers, 250,000 years of hardwired interpersonal connection experience. And those things are invisible to us these days, and we've disconnected from them. We've atrophied the ability to tap into what's below the waterline of our human nature. Things like yelling out the window, hey, we're going this way. That's atrophied. And it's while that's happening, everything that's moving so fast and swirling around us, it puts us in a trance state. And I really try to make that case in the book. There's most humans are in a trance right now. We don't realize that we're walking around in this transactional world literally like robots, disconnecting from our nature and leaving tons of opportunity and value on the table that is social capital.
Yeah. Let's talk about leadership for a second, because we have to lead through these times.
Yeah.
And I want to, in a minute, talk about some of the difficulties and challenges that America faces and we face as leaders right now. But when we talk about leadership, go back to why do Green Berets get shit done?
Yeah.
Well, Green Berets get shit done because we select people for certain capabilities.
Yeah.
When I work with companies and I work with organizations and athletes, I always bring up the fact that it's very easy to be good at what you do. When it's a blue sky day, your company's making money, customer retention is through the roof, you're winning games, you're scoring points, you feel good, you're not injured. A lot of people, most people, can find a way to be successful. But the reality is we live in this VUCA world, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity.
Yeah.
And we need leaders who come out and are able to actually adjust, change, adapt, and do things in the face of the challenges, because that is the reality. The reality when we build a business, when we play a sport, when we lead others, is that we are going to be challenged more than not.
Yeah.
And do we have people who are ready to do that?
Yeah, I mean, and Tim Spiker says that the leaders that are most worth following are inwardly sound and others focused, right? And I always think about Green Berets throughout my career, and that was certainly most of who they were, and they were very steady and stable inwardly, and they were always looking at the other party and how that affected what we were doing. They were others focused. They were really paying attention to the operational environment, the human terrain. And I that's great when you're working in these low trust, high stakes areas around the world that we got dropped into, and that where Green Berets still get dropped into. Now the problem is the churn is here. These unprecedented social conditions of division and distrust are here in our cities, in our communities, in our election system, where people will unfriend each other over a candidate. High school friends that have been friends for 5 decades will unfriend each other on social media and never speak to each other again, and catastrophize the outcome of an election to the point that they would end a friendship. And we've normalized it. Now it's a verb. I'm going to unfriend you, right? Like you and I did that when we were kids, but I would play with you the next day, right?
Yeah.
But now it's become this normalized verb. And that's a leadership problem. Leadership is the management of energy, yours and those around you, and how you manage your energy and how you connect with other humans is everything. And I think we've lost the ability to make human connection in a meaningful way. And if we don't get that back, I think it spells disaster for our civil society, not just in our bottom line, but in how we actually can govern ourselves.
We've come to a point where we can't find mutual agreement through disagreement, if that makes sense.
Civil discourse.
I've got to, and for me to be right, you got to be wrong.
Yeah.
And there cannot be any sort of other way to look at it. We can't sit down and say, look, I don't agree with you. These are the reasons why, but let's find some common ground. Or maybe we're just going to agree to disagree on this point, but later on down the road, you're going to have to help me. I had a chance a couple of years ago now on the show to talk to Newt Gingrich.
Right.
And that was, and also Patrick Murphy,
yeah,
former Secretary of the Army and Congressman. And those are conversations that we had there, which was, we used to live in a world where the two sides of the aisle could come together and they could sit down and say, okay, we're going to find a resolution even though we may not agree.
Yeah.
And we seem to have lost so much of that, and it's become this polarizing effect. One of the things you bring up in the book, rightly so, I believe, is that we as people emulate leadership.
Yeah.
Well, our elected leaders
Yeah.
are the people that we see every day
Yep.
as society.
Right.
And now when they're out there fighting, arguing, not getting along, creating this example for us as adults and our children, we're all subject to that behavior.
Yeah, I refer to them as divisionists, and I don't even think that's an actual word, but
I like it.
But I think it works in describing this because, again, this perfect storm of the churn that we have, you have this reality that, humans are like all mammals. We form in-groups and out-groups. That's what we do. And when we're afraid, we get even more inclusive, or we draw back into those groups, the people that look like us, think like us, vote like us. It's just what we do. But in America, one of the things that has made this civil society different, Robert Putnam says that this is a society of bridging trust. We have this ability to bridge beyond our in-groups and bridge into other out-groups. And that's been the social capital that's kept the secret sauce, that's kept this country strong, that makes businesses high-performing. But what's happened in the last 5 to 10 years is you've seen a downslide away from that bridging trust back into what bonding trust, where you only trust the people in your in-group. You only trust the people in your tribe or your party. And the leaders of this country at the institutional level have always been the vanguards of bridging trust, because it's not a state of nature that occurs normally. Like you have to put that in place.
Yeah.
Well, they've opted instead for this divisionism, where they foment division between in-groups and out-groups in favor of a narrow agenda rather than doing the more uncomfortable thing, which is to bridge us together. When's the last time you heard a politician or a policymaker actually talk about connecting and bridging as Americans? You don't hear it anymore. It's not even in the language. It's not even in the grammar. So if those divisionists are doing that, then yes, we mirror that at a community level, and it's a very, very scary outcome.
Well, how would you get the likes?
Exactly. And that's the tip of the iceberg piece, right? We start to think about and assess our relevance in the world based on how we are perceived, not in the natural world, but in a represented reality, right? How am I perceived here?
Yeah.
And that's not even the natural world. So it causes us to be performative in how we operate. There's filters all the way through, right? It's duck lips and selfies. And that is not how we actually operate with each other as humans, and which means our social skills atrophy.
Well, and you end up in a state, too, where you begin to judge almost your self-worth by what an algorithm is telling you.
Yeah.
Right? And we forget that this is still kind of a machine, and this algorithm is looking for certain things that may be pushing it out to people or not. And that's actually what's judging you. And then you're looking at it going, well, I only got 5 likes. I only got so many impressions of this thing. Therefore, I suck. I'm not good.
Yeah. Yeah, I go into this deep on the book, and I hope people will check it out, because there's a level of entanglement that we have with digital technology, particularly mobile technology. And before we get into the AI realm fully, we need to get a better sense of the human operating system and just how ancient and primal it is, and how ill-equipped it is to actually deal with this rapidly advancing technology. We need to really get clear on that. And I hope people will check that out, man, because like what you're talking about, the way we assess our relevance in the world based on an algorithm, it's a very dangerous way to navigate the world.
Yeah. I want to ask about what do we actually do?
Right.
So once we've identified it, which you talk about in the book is the very first step, we've got to identify that this is the situation we're in.
Yeah.
Once we do that, now we got to get messy.
Got to get messy, and that's getting below the waterline of that. If the iceberg is that metaphor for the human operating system, the tip of the iceberg is the modern world. Below the waterline is the traditional world. It's where we all come from. It's hunters and gatherers, and it turns out that we are just well-dressed Neanderthals, man. I mean, we are still just as primal as we were 250,000 years ago. We still navigate the world the same way. The brain, our biology really hasn't changed, but we've disconnected from that primal reality. In other words, what's below the waterline is invisible to us. So we got to get below the waterline, and we got to realize that it's kind of a messy creature that lives down there. And the acronym that I use for that is meaning-seeking, emotional, social storyteller who struggles. And if you start to look at yourself and those around you through that lens, it can give you levers and tools to actually have more authentic influence in that world over there.
Yeah. One of these ones I want to dig into here is your second S of storytelling.
Yeah.
Nick Lavery, who you know, and good friend of mine, and we've had a lot of chances to sit down and talk about this concept of the silent professional versus the quiet professional.
That's a great way to frame it.
We've got to get out there and tell these stories.
Yeah, we do. We do. I mean, storytelling, look, let's back it up, okay? Because I really think it's important, particularly many folks that are watching or listening to this, storytelling when you first hear it, because of the transactional world, you think, okay, bedtime for Bonzo, or this one time at band camp, or no shit, there I was. Yeah. That's not the storytelling I'm talking about. What we need to understand is that at a primal level, our brain is a metaphorical pattern matching organ. The brain actually makes sense. It has a mandate to make sense of the world, and it does it through storytelling. Storytelling is a 70,000-year-old sense-making tool. And so we ignore storytelling at our peril, Fran, but what's happened is in the transactional world, everything has become bullet points and talking points and elevator pitches, and so we've left story out of the equation. right? And leaders get up in front of their people at an all-hands meeting, and instead of talking about their story of struggle and what they had to go through to get to where they are and what they can learn from it, they talk about 3 ways to be great like me. And it's unwatchable. So we've omitted storytelling from how we engage other humans, and I think that's exactly why we're treating each other the way we are. We've got to get back to being better storytellers.
Well, you got to genuinely care about other people too.
You do.
And what they go through, because once you identify a person's story and what they went through to get to where they are, why it was important, what made them, then you can appreciate their positions. But because of the nature of this transactional relationship where I only know you on LinkedIn and what you want to present to me because social media is fake, right? And what you put on Instagram, well, now I think I know you, but I don't know you. Then when we disagree or we agree, I actually don't know where you come from or why you believe what you believe. So how do I then find common ground with you to actually come to a resolution?
In Operation Pineapple Express, which, by the way, a lot of volunteer groups did the same thing we did. You know, we just told our story of it. But in one of those situations where we were desperately trying to get my friend Nizam, you know, into the gate, he had been out in the crowd for 3 days at this point. He had no food, no water. And the Marines were getting ready to toss him, and the Taliban had formed a checkpoint behind him, and his phone was on 10% power, you know? So it wasn't looking good. And we got on a phone call with a diplomat who gave us 1 minute to tell us what the hell we wanted. In that 1 minute, we told stories about how Nizam had worn ladies' high-heeled shoes to get accepted in the Army to pass the height requirements, how he had gone to the Afghan Special Forces course, our Q course, had been shot through the face defending U.S. Green Berets, and we hit it like in a minute. And he got real quiet, and he said, "Did I tell you guys I was a Green Beret before I was a diplomat?" And there's no way that we ever would have got to that had there not been a narrative exchange. And then he brought him in. And the point here is that I go back to all the great Green Berets that I ever knew. They were awesome storytellers. And even more than that, it wasn't the stories they told, it was the stories they asked to hear. When they would go into these environments where most people would immediately reach for their weapon, these guys could ask questions that started with what and how, and they would get the other party to share stories. And the next thing you know, like, they're actually moving forward on an initiative together because of the dance of storytelling between those two individuals. And that kind of narrative competence is what we need in the country today.
You know, it's funny. People ask me what Green Berets do, and I tell them their primary job is to get shit done.
To get shit done strategically.
We were talking before we started about my day job, you know, where I started the security and operations company here in the city, and we do the majority of our work here in New York and in and around the city. We have almost exclusively Green Berets and soft guys who work for the company for that very reason. Yeah. Because they just get shit done, and it doesn't matter what you ask them to do, they figure it out.
It's a mindset, and I've had people ask me of late, like, how did you write a play when you weren't a playwright? How did you act in the play when, you know, you weren't an actor, and get Gary Sinise to produce it? You know, and well, doesn't everybody do that? Like, that's the approach, right? I mean, that's what you do. I saw a need to inform civilians on the cost of modern war, and I saw a need to validate and heal those who lived it. And so it only made sense to do it from the stage. So I'm going to surround myself with the best people that can teach me how to do that, and I'm going to listen and learn and eventually iterate and figure it out. And I credit all of that to the Green Beret NCOs and warrant officers who taught me that's how you get big shit done. But the reality is that what's in that book really is the roadmap for doing that, and a range of other things like you're talking about. I mean, the fact of the matter is all of us are capable of strategic outcomes if we set our mind to it. But it also requires not just a mindset, but I think it requires a skill set. And a lot of that skill set is to navigate this transactional world that we live in with better human connections.
Well, I encourage everyone to get out there and read the book because it's a quick read, it's a phenomenal read, and it gives you the roadmap, and it really lays out where we are in society. I'll tell you what we did. We got it done this morning because we're standing here in the city and the rain's picking up behind us, but we seem to have found the one spot under this cover that kept us dry.
Which I never found when I was on active duty. Right, but we seem to find it now. So.
Don't worry, we still got to walk out of here together, so it'll get us. But nobody's coming to save you. A Green Beret's Guide to Getting Big Shit Done. Scott, man, thanks so much.
Thank you,
Great seeing you again.
Appreciate it, man. Good to see you again.
American Jedburghs went on to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Directorate of the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh Podcast, an official program of the Green Beret Foundation. I'm your creator and host, Fran Racioppi. Join us next week for a new episode on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube for full episodes, highlights, and other long and short form content. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow the Jedburgh Podcast and the Green Beret Foundation on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, X, or Threads. Send your comments and inquiries to fran@jedburghpodcast.com. As former members of Special Operations Forces, the Jedburgh Media Channel and the Green Beret Foundation remain committed to supporting all generations of U.S. Army Special Forces and their families. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.